Kaylee Dries was nervous. She hadn't heard from her confidential source for 2 days, and she was supposed to meet him tonight. The timing could not be worse. A storm had made land the past 6 hours, covering Maine in thickening sheets of rain. She'd not had far to drive, just from Wathingham, where she lived and worked, to the outskirts of Lonesome Point, but the driving had been slow and treacherous. Drivers, including herself, had pulled off the highway at intervals to let the rain slow enough for them to see again. Visibility for parts of the 90-minute trip, now closing in on 2.5 hours with weather delays, was approximately 0. She was relieved and curious to finally see the fading billboard announcing the Cliff's Edge Motel just 2 miles up the road. At the rate she was going, it would be a long 2 miles. But she was comforted to know her destination was in sight. At 23, Kaylee was already among those young achievers who made names for themselves on 30 under 30 lists, and nods to up-and-comers that appeared annually, praising the next generation's best and brightest. She was going places, and like others of her type, she was the first to declare it. A natural journalist, Kaylee had ignored the probability of an internship at the Boston Globe or the Philadelphia Inquirer, choosing instead to learn her reporting chops at Little Wathingham, Maine's all-points bulletin. But she had her reasons. She was a small pond girl at heart, and she intended to be the biggest fish in it. Had she gone with the Globe or the Inquirer, she would be covering news that mattered to much of the world. But she would be the 4th journalist down on the left, in a cubicle, listening to 100 other journalists talk to sources and crank out stories with bylines nobody noticed. The ladder they climbed was steeper and much more crowded. This way she could move back to Wathingham where her family lived and be a star. And then it happened. The call from her source. He sounded nervous. In fact, he sounded nervous every time she subsequently spoke to him, as if someone might hear them. They never emailed. He insisted all emails were read by the government, or at least by the employers of everyone sending them. He wanted nothing in writing. He said he just wanted her to know what happened. But first, about that obituary you ran for Russell Drover. Russell Drover? She said, trying to remember which one it was and when it was published. She had been sitting at her desk rewriting copy when the call came in, the last of the day to be transferred by Rudy, the part-time office guy. Rudy was sweet, distracted, and more interested in finding a girlfriend than furthering his career, which was why he was a part-time receptionist at 26. The old guy who owned the Cliff's Edge outside of Lonesome Point, the voice said, sounding as if he'd cupped his hand over the phone. The Cliff's Edge. Are you a reporter or a parrot? She'd almost hung up on him then. She'd been pranked a few times, always by kids who thought annoying strangers on the phone was hysterical. But something in his tone, his nervousness, made her take a deep breath and refrain from snapping. I'm a reporter, Mr. Never mind that, he'd said. I just called to tell you that you got it wrong. Wrong? She said, immediately regretting repeating him again. Yes, wrong. How's that? She was sitting up now. She'd taken a pencil from an all-points coffee cup she used for them and poised it over a thin white reporter's notebook. Something told her this was different. This had substance. He didn't shoot himself like they said. We didn't say that either, sir. Suicide never reads well in an obituary. You think I'm playing with you? Is that what you think? His sharpness startled her. She sensed she had to be careful if she wanted him to keep talking. Are you telling me he was killed by someone else? She asked, still not recalling the obituary in question, but certain it had said nothing about suicide. Families preferred to say a sudden illness. It didn't matter now. She was being offered something she knew was bigger than the obituary beat, something people would talk about. He was murdered, yes, the man said. This time his tone was flat, almost sad. She waited a moment, letting him breathe while she decided how best to proceed. Is there more, sir? Is there something you'd like to tell me? Like Who you believe killed Mr. Drover? Oh, I know who killed him. Is there any place to eat around here? Kaylee asked. I didn't see anything driving in, and I've never been to Lonesome Point before. What kind of name is that anyway? Lenny stared at her a moment. I'm guessing you're not here to make friends. It was named because it has only one lighthouse, which someone at some point in time thought was lonesome out there all by itself. Get it? It's also 3 miles north. This is unincorporated territory you're in right now, not a lighthouse in sight. Thanks for letting me know, Mr. Winfro, but you can call me Lenny. No reason not to. Lenny, I appreciate the information. It's always good to know when you're in unincorporated territory. Now, is there some place to eat? I'd love to grab something before the storm keeps us in completely. There's a diner 2 miles back. I'm surprised you didn't see it. I may have. I was a little distracted. That's dangerous. Pardon? Distracted driving? Said Lenny. Right, totally. I drove past the only place to eat and I never saw it. Lenny smiled and said, It's not exactly the only place to eat. I could make you something. Got a nice little room in the back, kitchenette and everything. Using his thumb, he pointed toward a door behind him, left ajar just enough to see that it led into a back room. Old man Drover, that's who owned this place until his tragic death a few months back. He had it built for himself so he wouldn't take up one of the motel rooms. Need 'em for pretty ladies like you. He grinned, sending a shiver through Kaylee. She thought he looked like a lizard when he smiled. She expected his tongue to dart across the front desk and lick her cheek. She stepped back. Thanks so much for the offer, Lenny, but I couldn't put you out. No trouble at all. He seemed to be enjoying her discomfort. I'll be back in an hour, I'd guess. If anyone calls, I'll be sure to take a message, he said, leaning back on his stool. Lenny put his arms over his head, exposing sweat stains in October. It was an unattractive sight, which Kaylee was sure he knew. The front desk clerk at the cliff's edge was someone she wished she'd never met and hoped it was a one-time encounter. Well, bye then, Kaylee said, dropping the room key in her purse and turning for the door. Bye then, Lenny said. He watched her hurry outside into the growing darkness, then reached for his cell phone. The package had arrived.